Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how I tried to recreate the Smiley killer mask using latex, cotton, and gelatin. So I started this using my face cast, and I used these few pictures as references. I used a black pencil to map out the protruding features of his mask, like the temples, and I of course drew where I wanted the eyes and the mouth to be. Now I forgot to coat my face cast in Vaseline, which is why you see latex out, but I just used a thin layer to make it easier for the latex to come off later. Now going backwards, I poured some liquid latex into a container and I ripped off a little piece of cotton and dipped it into the latex. Now in the present time, I laid the piece down on the temple mark and I smoothed it down, and I continued that for the entire mark. Now I could have technically built up the temple later, but I didn't plan this very well, as you will see throughout the video. Next, because I have such a large nose, I had to build up the mask to be extremely thick to hide the bump that my nose would show. And I literally used almost all of my latex in making this because of how thick I had to make it. And I also built up the cheekbones because if you look closely at the pictures, you can see them. So my first thought was to leave space for the mouth and eyes so I could see and breathe, but I ended up only using this for like a mold, kind of, for the gelatin. So I just kept building up the flat kind of shape of his face and trying to build up the thickness so you couldn't see my nose. So I let this sit out to dry for a couple of days, and the red color on the temple is just blood that got into the latex. But my goal was to keep building up the thickness to hide the bump of my nose and to still maintain the facial features like the cheekbone and the temples. And here I said screw it, and I ended up filling in the mouth and eye holes, and I figured I would just cut them out later, but it ended up being way too thick and it was extremely hard to cut through, which is why I only ended up using this to put the gelatin on. And after a few more days of working on this, I was happy with the thickness and coated the entire thing in latex to smooth it out, and this is what it looked like when it was completely done. Next, I used a butter knife to pry this off of the face cast, and when it was loose, I slipped my hand underneath and I popped it off. Then, I proceeded to cut the only gelatin I had out of these tubes and I melted it down. I used 2 different foundation shades to color the gelatin to make it more opaque and skin-like, and I also used blue and red eyeshadows to make it look like there were veins and capillaries in the skin. And I kept playing around with the foundation until I made the perfect skin shade. Now I didn't film this part, but I just coated the mask in a light foundation color to make the undertone a little, yes, yellow. And anyways, I used a palette knife to cover the mask in a thin layer of gelatin. And if you notice, the gelatin wasn't going on very smooth, and so I had to use a blow dryer to melt away some of the bumps. And I went back and did a thicker coat of gelatin, and I tried to make it as smooth as I possibly could, but it still wasn't very smooth, so I had to use the blow dryer a lot to smooth it down as much as I possibly could. And I made the mistake of not remelting the gelatin, so it became very chunky, which is one of the main reasons that I was having so many issues. Now the next day, I remelted the remaining gelatin and I filled in the drips and bumps to try and make it as smooth as possible before I painted it. And once again, I didn't remelt the gelatin, so it became very chunky, but I wanted to make the nose part thicker, so I slapped a huge section of nasty gelatin right on the smoothest part of the mask, and then I had to use a blow dryer to try and make it smooth again. But now I'm just taking a hairbrush and I press it on the gelatin to give it like a porous texture almost. And I went back with the blow dryer because the nose spout was still really bothering me. And when the gelatin got as smooth as I could, I powdered the entire thing with translucent powder to get rid of the shine. Next, I took a very light shade and highlighted the temples and cheekbones, and then I just took a bunch of brown eyeshadows and contoured the same places. Then once again, I marked out the eyes and mouth holes with brown eyeshadow. Next, I'm using my alcohol-activated zombie palette and a toothbrush to make the gelatin look more skin-like. I used the red tone around the eyes and mouth for irritation, and then I used a mix of the pale and brown tones that I just flicked onto the mask with the toothbrush, and I used a tiny bit of the blue to bring some vein tones back into the mask. And here I'm just doing a bit more red to make it look more opaque. And finally, for the last time, I mapped out exactly where I wanted the eyes and mouth with the black. Now I'm using a knife and cutting out the eyes and the mouth, and I only cut through the gelatin, and later I took the gelatin off of the latex and cotton to make it easier to sew up the holes. Next is my struggle to sew up the eyes. I tried sewing straight through the gelatin, but I realized it was too fragile, so then I coated the holes in latex to make them a little more durable and so they wouldn't rip as much. Now here I had already sewn up the mouth off camera, but I tried that same eye hole again and it still wasn't working, so I used more latex and I tried the other eye. Now the other eye ended up being totally fine, so I sewed it up and I tried to use like an X type of pattern most of the time because I wanted it to resemble some of the reference pictures, but I also kind of wanted to make it look like X sew marks, if that makes any sense. After I finished, I coated the stitch marks in latex to make sure the gelatin wasn't going to rip any more than it already had and to make sure that the string stayed in place. After that, I tried again with the other eye, and I realized it would just be best if I took off the latex that was already on there, and I ended up having to recolor it and put a nicer coat of latex on there, and while I waited for that to dry, I painted the other eye. I used mixtures of reds and blacks to match the mouth, and I basically just wanted it to look super irritated and bloody, and I added some runny blood in the middle later. Now I could finally stitch up the other eye, and I had to be a lot more careful because I didn't want the gelatin to rip because I had already punctured it a few times and it was more delicate than the other side. But I did the same process as the other side and I did my best to match the color, but I like the other eye better. Finally, once all that was done, I coated the entire thing in latex to seal everything in and to strengthen the thinner parts of the gelatin so it wouldn't rip as easy when I went to play with it or take it off or something. And after many months of putting this off, I was finally done. Hey Mom, do I look pretty?
You look like a demented, curious George.
You're gonna make me cry.
Oh my god.
It smells really bad under here, like nasty gelatin. I'm gonna go take this off now.
Okay.
Oh, you can't see either. I'm kind of blind. I'm totally blind. I could fall down the stairs at any moment.